A listener and brother reached out to me after the episode where I spoke with Owen and had a challenge for me. We decided to take a call to work through the issue, which was a difference in our opinion on the topic of work ethic. So, we're going to talk about that today. And normally I begin the episode with a quote that is pertinent to the topic of the episode, but I'm going to do that later. So, what was it that this brother, this fellow listener, had trouble with? In the episode, we talked about the work ethic in the context of understanding the master that you're serving. I had said something to the effect that know who you are serving, know who you are working for, and if they require a 4 out of 10 of effort, then you give your best 4 out of 10. And I'm going to explain what I meant by that in a bit more depth. But ultimately, the challenge, the gauntlet was thrown by this listener, and ultimately I agree with his disagreement. So what was his disagreement? What did he think about the way we should approach such matters is give maximum effort always. Do the job to the best of your ability so that no matter who the work serves, you can be proud of the work. This is excellent advice. Over the course of an hour and a half conversation, I really understood his perspective and where he was coming from. So I just want to acknowledge, I stand corrected. And to this listener, thank you for having that conversation with me, because I'm of two minds here. I still believe in my statement about giving the best work for the value that is deserved, but I'm going to explain why. But I want to acknowledge this conversation because, it corrected an error in my thinking. And it was generally tainted by my experiences I had working in the video games industry, which this is a whole ball of wax that we're going to get into today in a little bit more detail. So here comes the quote. Do not give what is holy to the dogs, nor cast your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn and tear you to pieces. That's Matthew 7, verse 6-7, and of course, spoken by Jesus Christ at the Sermon of the Mount. Now, you don't have to be a spiritual or religious person to really appreciate some of the greatest virtues and wisdom that Christ shares in that section of the Bible, Matthew chapters 5-7. I highly encourage anyone to read it. This is something that I found incredibly interesting far before my change over to handing my life over to God. So I don't want to turn this into a Christian conversion session, but I encourage you to read it. There's some incredible, powerful insights into human nature and some very simple ways of dealing with the common things that trip us up. Anyway, here he's speaking about this idea that is my perspective on the idea of giving your best 4 out of 10. But it's really important to marry this concept of pearls before swine. I'm sure you've heard that statement before. That's actually where this comes from. It's really important to connect it with what he says just before this verse, which is to remove the log from your own eye before you worry about the speck in your brother's. And I think what this really means is you need to be able to assess your own capabilities with a humble spirit to really ensure that you are not seeing yourself and the things that you do as superior or far above others. So do not give what is holy to the dogs is an incredibly powerful statement, but you must make sure that you are not taking that with a heart full of pride. So I want to first dive into the concept of excellence. What is excellence? And this is going to be the dividing point between our two perspectives. And at the end of our conversation, we came to some pretty interesting conclusions, and I think still raised further questions. And I would love to hear your perspective on this, because I think throughout the entirety of this podcast, the entirety of this diary, I've been asking a lot of pretty hard questions and offering some experiences or advice from my own life. But today I want to talk a little bit more about acknowledging our strengths and standing up for what is right in the context of everything we've talked about. Because in this modern world, there are a lot of dark hearts who seek only the best of themselves at the cost of others. Welcome to the Sons of Men podcast, a conversation dedicated to meaning in the lives of men, offering a window into the trials of masculinity, where we talk about family, spirituality, creativity, and legacy to better understand each other and to offer solutions for the next generation in an increasingly shallow and hostile world. I'm your host, Curtis Wiebe, father and husband, addict in lifelong recovery, and an advocate for men struggling in the shadow of suffering. This is episode 5, The Value of Excellence. I remember the early days of taking my first job, really for a company, and as a full-time employee, full of hope and optimism, and ready to experience something wholly new to challenge my creative life. This is, of course, when I went to Sweden. Now, my role had been clearly defined by the company, you could call it, you can see it on my resume, a story supervisor. But there were some nebulous factors around it that I didn't fully grasp what those expectations were, to be completely honest. And this led to some problems down the road. I was coming to a company that was working on a brand new intellectual property, which is always a gargantuan undertaking, especially when you have many, many different minds and perspectives in a room. And I also came into this scenario without a real understanding of some of the problems that had been there long before I arrived. In particular, lack of vision and a lack of clarity in any direction that this project was moving. Now, you also have to remember that my whole creative life had been worked in collaboration with others. In fact, those were often the most meaningful experiences when it came to my creative output, working alongside somebody who really appreciated the writing and the thoughtfulness that I put into my scripts or into the world building. And there was a lot of naivety on my part that kind of relationship would continue in a situation outside of comic books, for instance, and into a larger setting of video games. This is all to say how important it is that you have a defined role and expectation, that you have clear mandate, and it allows you to deliver excellence because you know what is expected of you. You can complete it to a level that you can be proud of and sometimes go beyond. But that standard must be clear. What happened in my experiences at that studio was I put as much heart and effort and collaborative spirit into the workplace as I had previously when it was me and one or two other people. But there was a traumatizing factor that I could never have prepared myself for, and that my value and my talents, they were never understood or appreciated. In fact, it led to strangely suspicion, distrust, and I couldn't understand why my desire to help and share exciting ideas was suddenly being met with not only derision, but anger I think now looking back, it was being seen as some sort of power play that I had better ideas. I've talked about this before. You're going to start to see where a lot of the kernel of these ideas came from. This led to a lot of problems for me, and it would continue following me for the many years that even after leaving that studio and joining a new one, it kept happening. And I couldn't understand it for the longest time. I went through a phase of extreme self doubt. It had always come easily before. The collaborative energy was a joy. Sure, there was struggle, but it was always towards a shared purpose of something that we were trying to create together. And I couldn't crack this wall that seemed to be ever present in a room full of people with differing ideas and competing to be the one with the best. And it led me to a pretty dark place. I think by now maybe you can assume, rightly, that these experiences of belittlement and derision and isolation led me to relapse on alcohol, which only further complicated all of these problems. Because I understood from the perspective of where I was standing, I didn't matter. And my heart of wanting to bring people together to create a collaborative jazz between people was not wanted. And my heart then was not wanted because that is how I found joy in creation alongside others. So it's time we talk a little bit about the other side of the coin. I've spoken my heart to you quite openly about things that I think a lot of people, a lot of men in leadership struggle with. Those are the things that I saw in the men around me at those studios. Of course, I worked with some amazing people too, don't get me wrong, but the ones who would have power, the ability to enforce change, that's what power is, it put me in a pretty precarious place. I want to talk about the ability to stand up for yourself, because you can love and serve and be humble all day long, but I'm reminded of the conversation I had with a brother who I'd mentioned in a previous episode about vulnerability. I want to talk about protecting yourself in vulnerability. Because the reality is, in work and in relationships, abuse does exist. How do you stop this? With all the qualities that I mentioned before, how do you fight against abuse, mistreatment? Know your value. I talked previously about the resentment that I felt when I believed I wasn't credited for a project that I worked on. I was trying to find a way to share how you can deal with such mistreatment so that it doesn't poison your heart. But it's only fair to talk about what you are also deserving of. If you are in a situation where the values, the heart that you are sharing, the servant's heart, the vulnerable heart is being abused, and the other is unwilling or incapable of accepting or returning, that's a bad situation. And let's clear this up. If you did the work, you should be credited. There's no excuse for taking away the validation of the work somebody did. There's no excuse. But you really need to start from a place of proper assessment. How do you recognize your own strengths and your gifts? I think it just comes from taking an honest look at yourself from a heart of humility. Those foundational traits that we've been discussing all along, and accepting them and owning them and being proud of them. These are abilities that you've honed over your lifetime. You know their value and you should never undersell it. Protecting your value is essential, but you have to do it from a place of humility. Still, service must be valued and not abused. And I think that's what I came up against again and again at the studios I worked for. My desire to lead and serve people, something that I'm pretty good at. Above everything else, that is the one thing about Curtis that I think I, especially over the last few years, have honed and strengthened and accepted as what I should be doing with my life moving forward. But that heart, that desire, was punished. I had to take a seat and really evaluate, what did that mean? Did that invalidate who I was, that these companies just didn't care? I think that's part 2 to this, is being honest with yourself, that generally in a large company, you don't matter. I think if you can accept this and just do the job without expectation, you can rise to that level of excellence that my brother referred to. You can put in a 10 out of 10 and know the value of the work, know the value of your skills. And you can go home at the end of the day proud of the effort you put in. But I think it's really important to not be naive that the work you do holds deeper meaning to your bosses or to the company in general. I think a lot of people already do this. And this is something that, because I've worked for myself for so long, it was a really hard realization. So many people in Sweden, so many of my friends very much have this mentality that the work-life balance, it's much healthier. You do the job, you do it well, and put it away. And I think my entrepreneurial heart gets in the way of this sometimes. And let's just be honest, I don't work. I don't work as well for the man. Probably a matter of pride, but we're not going to get into that for this episode. I would also say, make a conscious choice about the master you serve. And what do I mean by that? Well, back to that earlier scenario, the studio with that I was working, there was, as I said, some problems that existed long before I got there. And that team, in particular, the team that I worked with, was quite broken. And it had been months of delays or changes or directional shifts that caused a lot of impact on my team in particular. And I'm going to mention a mentor of mine, somebody who was actually monumental in helping me understand my gift of leadership. And after hearing this, you'll know who you are. And thank you so much. When things were really dark, he took a call with me, and we were discussing all this toxic treatment that was going on in the studio. And he asked me a simple question. Do you want to do the bidding of the bosses, or do you want to serve your team? Which do you prioritize? And that shifted everything for me. In the scenario at that studio, I couldn't affect positive change. It was impossible, but I could serve my team. I remember really clearly how that lightened my heart, my attitude. It changed my perspective. I'd never considered that. I was new to all of this. So even in these scenarios where you're working, where your value isn't fully understood or appreciated, you can still find a way to use those skills to benefit the people around you. I think, in summary about this section about excellence, I fully agree with the brother who reached out. Do the best work you possibly can. Give a 10 out of 10, no matter which master you serve. Because at the end of the day, it's you who has to look back at that work and be honest and say, I'm proud, or I could have done better. And I don't think in any way do I ever want to encourage giving your second best. I think being a good, strong man is doing the best you possibly can, even in difficult circumstances. So, I concede your point, brother, but I want to talk about the second portion. What about the pearls? Lest they trample them under your feet and turn and tear you to pieces. The truth is that in numerous scenarios, the more I fought for richer and more meaningful creative vision at any of the studios I worked at, it made me no friends with the upper management. This idea of a strong creative engine was lost on most people around me, and I often found myself isolated or bullied, gaslit. It was from this that I take my perspective that I should do the exact job expected of me to a level of excellence as much as this project would allow. And I just found in my experience that anything beyond is lost or confuses the matter and sometimes even enrages people. I don't know why. My general feeling is that this deeper value sometimes triggers an aggrieved heart that's wrapped in pride, but maybe that's another topic for another show. So what do you do with pearls? Well, in the years since those very difficult and trying circumstances, I've been asking this question over and over. And I've come to one conclusion. Save them for those that value, understand, or contribute. Let those pearls become diamonds with the right people. I've noticed over the last couple of years, looking back at the course of my life, and some consistency through it all. It's a group of friends, creative collaborators, people that when I sit down with them, it's like no time has passed. The veil, the mask doesn't exist. I know you have friends like that too, partners, creative collaborators, workmates. I call them gems. I realize that we get so few of those in life. And for me as a creative, that's where I want to share my ideas with. Because I know that extra effort, those more inspired ideas, I can hand to them. And in good faith, they make it better and hand it back to me. And that's the nature of jazz, of that creative relationship. But the same at any workplace. You may be in an amazing position. The company you work for has an owner or boss who sees those small efforts that you do and rewards them, cherishes them. Give the 100% and then another 10% because it is valued. Know the right place of your value. Value the gems in your life. At work, at home, in recreation, in your social life. That's where that extra value matters. You have value. You have something to give to the world. It's important for you to acknowledge it, secure it, know your value, protect it. If you've done the work, you deserve the credit. If you are being mistreated, you are allowed to stand up for yourself. If you have a servant's heart, it should be reciprocated, or else all of this meaning and value is lost. but it doesn't impact the nature of your commitment to excellence. So to the gem who called me out, thank you. Because I think if I had left this idea a little too open, it might have been misconstrued that only certain people receive our value. My only real condition is that you honestly evaluate the people around you. I think you know who those people are. It's written on your heart. So take a look around this week and the upcoming weeks. See where the extra you do is acknowledged or appreciated. And in the meantime, work hard and be proud of the work that you do. And if it comes down to it, stand up for yourself or for others whose value is being demeaned in the workplace or in your community. Because if we don't stand up, who will? I think this is probably going to come up a lot. I can already sense in the conversation as I've woven my way through it, I'm still of two minds. There's a part of me that I think it comes from disdain of my experiences in the past, and there's definitely resentment there. I can feel it in my heart when I'm talking about it. I really felt that I had dealt with a lot of the anger that I felt from my mistreatment. It's still pretty raw, brothers. So I'd love to hear what you think. I don't want my heart to be tainted by resentment. And even though I spoke about it only recently, I can still feel it's festering there. And I think it can block someone from excellence. I'm a little baffled, to be honest. So I leave it to you. Maybe you can help me out. I'd love to hear from you. And in the meantime, I'm going to question the nature of this new idea and wrestle with it. And maybe find an answer somewhere down the road. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Sons of Men podcast. This is a hard one. Sometimes that's the way it is. But it's important to remember we're not alone. And there's always one of us, one phone call or an email away. So if you're feeling the same, drop someone a line. Someone who you value and who values you in return. God bless.